program description, data visualization, dashboards, and inbound supply chains is as follows. Effective vendor performance and vendor compliance programs generate a lot of timely and accurate data about inbound supply chains. The challenge is turning that data into actionable information. Smart vendors and retailers mine that data to improve supply chain performance. With the right combination of design knowledge and quality data, users can leverage digital scoreboards, dashboards, and analysis grids to monitor, analyze, and troubleshoot performance against desired metrics. This webinar will introduce data visualization and dashboard best practices and apply those practices to improving vendor compliance, supply chain performance, and supply chain visibility. Presenting today's program is Kevin Harris. Kevin Harris is the Director of Freight Audit for Compliance Network. Kevin has over 13 years experience as a project and marketing manager with Compliance Network, helping retailers develop and implement process and profit improvement solutions. Prior to joining Compliance Network, Kevin managed successful distribution operations for very large and small retailers and manufacturers. He got his start in operations and logistics in 1983 as an infantry officer in the U.S. Army serving in the 3rd Ranger Battalion. So without further ado, I am pleased to turn the program over to Kevin.
Kate, thank you very much for that. I want to point out that I've actually been with Compliance Networks for about 17 years. I think that 13-year number is a relic number from several years ago in another presentation. This is a good session to segue into the fall conference. So we're doing a kind of a hands-on working session for the fall conference, and we hope to see you there. It's coming up on us pretty quickly. I'm going to focus this session on one set of data, which we'll get to from all of the massive different types of data available in the inbound supply chain. But first, we want to talk a little bit about exactly what is data visualization and what are dashboards, and why would I describe a dashboard separately from a scoreboard or an analysis screen. So the data visualization is using graphics that are encoded with data to help that data become easier to understand. And that is separate from other kinds of graphics, such as flowcharts, for example, which don't necessarily depend on data to communicate a message. So we want to make sure that we're all clear that we're talking about charts and graphs that aggregate data and then communicate it to help someone understand what is going on in a specific activity. Just because a flowchart has a number or numbers in it does not necessarily make it a quantitative tool. So that's what data visualization tools are all about. When we first started, it didn't take us long to determine, and we've been around for over 20 years. We've been around for 18 years. It didn't take us long to determine that in the process of performing our core competency for our customers, that we were acquiring a lot of data. And because of the nature of what we do, that data had to be timely and accurate and complete. So not only were we able to be effective in our core competency of vendor compliance and vendor relations and supply chain visibility and improving supply chain performance, but this massive amount of data we had could easily become overwhelming to our customers. And although we worked diligently to provide list screens and maybe after a while we pivot grids, what we call analysis grids, we still weren't happy with our capability to provide data visualization. And about 12 years ago, if you can see on the screen there, Dr. Edward Tufte, he's essentially the father of modern information design and data visualization. Greg Holder, our CEO, and I attended over the course of a few years 2 of his day-long sessions, which are renowned among people that work with data visualization, to help understand what we needed for our customers and what would be the best way to provide that for them. So we've been chasing this for over a decade, this idea of data visualization for the inbound supply chain data. And in the last year or so, we finally discovered the tool that we thought was adequate, I shouldn't say adequate. It met our high standards for what we wanted to use to provide data visualization for our customers. And if you look on the second name on the screen there, it's Stephen Few, an innovator in information design, and also an advocate of Edward Tufte's philosophies. So many of the concepts we're going to talk about today are based on the design principles of Stephen Few. So the primary purpose of data visualization is to help users understand what that data represents, how it's important to them, how it affects their organization, and what they can do to use that data to make things better. Ultimately, data visualization can enable better decisions and actions based on what is represented by the data. That is our intent, is to improve understanding and to improve decision-making based on that understanding. Data visualization tends to deal in trends, comparisons, and aggregations, like sums, averages, and counts, and tends to not get bogged down in detailed data. When you get down to the details, you're back to the data again. So you're looking at that same overwhelming list of things that are hard to sort out. But with data visualization, we can make it a lot easier. 2 components that you have to bring to bear to design and deploy and make use of competent, robust data visualization tools are skills, and not just skills of the designer, but skills of the users who are going to use that tool to make things better for their company. The first thing we look at when designing a data visualization tool is, what is it for? We know what the data set represents, but what does the user need that to be able to do with that data set? Who is the target user or user group? We want to avoid common mistakes, like putting a giant corporate logo in the upper left part of the screen, which is the first place a user looks, who typically does not need to know that they work in that company or that that dashboard was provided by a certain solution provider. We want to assess, do we have the data available to achieve the purpose that the user's looking for? And if not, how do we find that data? And then we want to have the skills to leverage how the normal humans use a computer screen or a computer most effectively, so that it becomes the tools become as efficient as possible in terms of transferring helpful information to the user. In terms of technology, the first important thing is to have very, very high quality data that's complete and accurate and timely, and then to have a platform that encourages the user to take advantage of the data and can provide all the different nuances of effective data visualization that you need to have a competent tool. So there's not too much esoteric in the work we've been doing with data visualization graphics. We know that the bar chart is a very effective way for users to compare relative size in a stacked bar chart is a very good way to compare the relative size of a whole number, the whole of a component. We know that line charts are a good way to show trends over time, and area charts also can be effective to show trends over time and relative degree of activity or the amount of some aggregation. Spark lines, which are not nearly as well known as bar charts or line charts or area charts, are small graphics designed to provide a quick representation of numerical or statistical information within a piece of text. And it takes the form of a graph, but as you'll see there in my image, it doesn't necessarily, or really by definition, doesn't have any axes indicated. You're looking at a min, a max, and maybe degree of change and a trend. Which way are we going with this? That you can absorb in a glance. Of course, tables and pivot tables can include aggregations that can be quite helpful, and you should never employ a graphic when a table can be much more efficient to accomplish a goal, and often be more efficient in terms of space utilization on a screen. Of course, there's the time-honored pie chart. May they rest in peace. So just because we're going to focus today on an online tool that optimizes a user's computer screen doesn't mean that you can't do data visualization, scorecards or grids or reports that are suitable to be printed offline. And in fact, an effective what we're calling data boards or dashboard should actually enable the user to export or otherwise print a screen so they can maybe do some troubleshooting work or analysis, some filtering and grouping, and then print that off so they can share it with colleagues working on a similar problem, or as a team on the same problem. So, So we, based on our studies with the Stephen Few's work, or studies of Stephen Few's work, at this point in time, we are focusing on dashboards to accomplish a specific thing, and other kinds of data screens, like a screen designed for analysis or performance monitoring, or a scoreboard to accomplish something different. So we've, in the current lexicon that we're using, it is subject to change. We're calling a data board a general type of tool that is a visual display. It has the most important information that a user needs to monitor performance or evaluate it or achieve one or more objectives. It should be on a single computer screen. It should not require any kind of scrolling or left or right or up or down. And it should optimize how users use computer screens and allow them to observe information at a glance. What we're calling a dashboard is specifically a situational awareness tool that a user might check once or twice a day or once a week, looking for some kind of anomalous behavior that would kick off some activity to do some research or some kind of corrective action. Performance boards in our lexicon right now, are a tool we would use to monitor trends or performance over time. Scoreboards is where you're focused on comparing performance against a goal or against the performance of others. And in our environment right now, we're looking at user-defined boards where users can actually be able to drop and drag and create their own screen views. So one of the things, well, two, again, I want to reinforce that we're going to look at dashboards today, and then one particular data set, and that in that context, we're going to be looking for situational awareness monitoring. And overall, the data boards aren't designed for in-depth research, analysis, or troubleshooting. They should be designed to lead someone or guide someone or give them a jumping off point just to begin an in-depth analysis if necessary, or to indicate that it is necessary. But those are activities that are better suited toward list grids or analysis grids that allow an assessment of data at different levels of aggregation all the way down to detail. So to review, we talked about, I mentioned that a data board was a visual display for monitoring, comparing things, or alerting, i.e. situational awareness. And now we want to talk about a dashboard in the same way. So a dashboard, and this is a design criteria that we have adopted from the author Stephen Few, is a visual display of the most important information needed to achieve one or more objectives that has been consolidated on a single computer screen so it can be monitored at a glance. And that is easy to read, but it's much more difficult to accomplish. But we'll see how we can do that as we move along. So some elements of a dashboard. It should be clear, concise data. It should be customized to a particular function or goal or user's needs. Dashboards, as I've mentioned several times, are to maintain situational awareness. They want you to see, the dashboard should give you a view of multiple elements concerning a particular situation. They should give you a comprehensive awareness of a current situation and project how that situation is going to do in the future, either getting worse or better. They can also support performance monitoring, but in a very tactical sense. So again, it's all about situational awareness and determining, once a problem has been identified, whether action is required and what do we need to do to respond to that, to respond with that action. All right, so just going over a few basics, not all the gory details, but a few basics of putting together not just a dashboard, but frankly a report, any other kind of data board, a scoreboard. These are the things to consider for most of the people on our planet. And that is, the upper left quadrant is prime real estate on a computer screen. And it's the first place everybody looks. And based on my graphic here, you can probably guess this next place users tend to go, and that is to the right. So the most important quadrant is labeled accordingly, and the next most important quadrants are labeled in the upper right and the bottom left, because users tend to drift from the upper right down to the bottom left when they're surveying a screen, and then the last place they tend to look is the bottom right quadrant, or the least important quadrant. So how do we approach that? What we do is we emphasize the contents of the upper left quadrant, because that is the most important. The quadrant in the upper right and bottom left can stay normal. And then the least important quadrant, where we do not want to attract someone's attention unless that's where they want to go, because we want to focus on the most important quadrant, we will tend to use objects that are de-emphasized in terms of color or size. All right, so in the universe of inbound supply chain data, where we've got POs and receipts and ASNs and audits, item files, freight data, and if a supply chain visibility tool or vendor compliance tool is employed, you're likely to have charge data. Charge data in our world includes what are the KPIs or metrics or rules that vendors are working towards, who are the vendors, what kind of audits are available from those audits, what violations, and from those and charges, and from those violations, what sources are you using? Are they audits done on a piece of paper, manually entered? Were they done with carton content scanning tools? Are they audits that are done behind the scenes by a computer? And we've got all kinds of dates of when things occur, audits and charge creation and violation creation and so on. So we chose as our first data source to our first work on a dashboard. So we went for the most difficult data board in our way of thinking, and that is the dashboard, meaning we want to take a very common data set within that our customers use, and that is charge data, and that is data associated with the process of auditing, detecting violations, calculating charges, notifying all the stakeholders, and so on. So obviously, in our world, that's very important information, and we wanted to address the challenge of with that data and with in the context of audits and violations and charges or vendor compliance. How can we develop a dashboard that truly meets the definition of a situational awareness monitoring tool? So, having struggled with an actual tactical tool that could be helpful on a daily basis or weekly basis, in discussions with one of our customers, they came up with the notion that if you could see daily activity by source, and you could see that you might have a data point that appears anomalous, or you might have data points where nothing is happening, where there's zero data created or zero activities for a given source on a given day. Then that would be helpful in terms of identifying if something is not working correctly. So if you look in the upper left, our prime real estate, what we have here is a daily activity by violation source that could be helpful. For example, if a new rule had been, or a set of rules had been deployed in a vendor compliance program, or if a new detection source. So, for example, if a particular retailer had not been evaluating ASN performance and had recently activated a solution to monitor ASN performance, then they might want to know that this particular tool kicked off perhaps an anomalous number of detections. So that would be worthy of looking at, because if that happens, then the retailer needs to correct that and disapprove those audits or violations or charges so that they don't get transmitted to the vendor. So going along with that, if I'm looking at, by the way, well, I'll go over this later. So going along with that, if I happen to see what appears some anomalous data there, and I'm looking at the back and forth of this information, it might be helpful to see how the prior year week, how much activity was generated during that period, or prior year month, and so on. And so here we have an aggregated view, a pivot table basically of week to date and then month to date and year to date. So if I became concerned that the time periods, that there was something about this time period perhaps that was relevant to the data I was looking at or considering, then it might be helpful if I had a table here that I could then drill down into by period. So these grids are designed to support the data that is being shown up in the top of the screen. And what we have here is on the bottom left, we have the sources for the time period that's active in the screen. So in this case, you can see that the top three sources by total charges have been identified in bold. We've got bars here that indicate by relative size how much the charges for that source compare to other charges in that time period, other sources in that time period. And then by color, they indicate percentile, by a 20th percentile. Looking over to the right, you see that we've got a nice little spark line there, so we can see if there's an unusual trend going on for the time period that we filtered for in this data set. And this, you can't see it on the graphic, but this is a link so that I can click on this row and it will filter the remaining grids for that particular source. So it would filter the categories by those categories included in that source. Although in our world, to be clear, a category can have multiple sources. So in this case, you would only see those categories that were included in the summary data for this source, and then the rules in those categories. One other thing, it would also be helpful if once you've whittled this down, let's pop up another view. Once you've whittled this down, say you came up here to the upper left and you clicked on that piece of data that appeared to be kind of an outlier, and it then filtered over here in this fiscal year information, so you could drill down into that day. It would also filter here so that you can click on this and see the sources that created this data point right here and the categories that applied and the rules. And then each of these should have a link so that once I've whittled down to the source or category or rule data that I need to determine what's caused this anomalous data point, I should be able to click on one of these and take me to a detail screen where now I'm actually looking at a list that corresponds with this filter state of each of these records to show me the detail I might need in order to understand if there's been a problem or not. All right, so here is a date on the bottom left. You're seeing a date filter tool. It also is an area chart. So it would be great if I saw in the course of my work, not necessarily related to dealing with this anomalous problem, but if I saw some activity that seemed unusual here over a period of time, and I wanted to filter for that, I can grab a handle on either side, grab that data I want, and have these grids filter for that. And then in our least important quadrant, let me get that up there, we've got our filter data right here. In this case, this is a retailer view, so you're looking at some fiscal year and calendar year filters, and you're looking at a source, category, and rule filter tree that also affects these grids here. Now, this is a retailer view, and let's see how we could make this relevant for vendors. Vendors are less concerned about the source of a charge. They really want to know, they're going to be more interested in a category of charge, i.e. ASN issue versus carton issue or transportation issue. So for the vendor view, what we've done is we've removed sources from the picture. So everything applies the same as it did with the other dashboard. Here in this particular example, here's what could be some unusually high volume charges. They, again, when you click on these, a little a legend drops down, you click on it, and it'll filter this data over here, and all of these, or both of these grids, as far as, so we've changed the colors. So here, this area graph represents total charges that the vendors received, and the green is reversals of those charges, red being bad and green being good. Many vendors who use our portals many users will represent multiple vendors, so we provided, in this case, the ability for a vendor to click down and select one or more of their sub-vendors, and then we provided a similar tool, a tree tool like I showed on the retailer screen, that breaks things down by categories and rules. If you're really paying attention, you'll notice that when I grabbed this screenshot, that I had still not removed, or I had failed to remove the word sources from that particular filter, but it's a category and rules source of filter. Okay, wow, that concludes our presentation on data visualization and the inbound supply chain. And Kate, I am ready for any questions, if anybody has any.
Okay, wonderful. All right, let's see here. The first question we have, how are these topics relevant to the inbound supply chain?
Okay, so I kind of touched on this at the beginning, and that is that a robust vendor performance tool or program can do a lot to improve performance for the inbound supply chain in terms of on-time delivery, in full, and other rules that I actually kind of indicated here on the screens, having to do with packaging or ASN accuracy, and there's hundreds. But also, this is important because two things. In order to make this work, you've got to gather a bunch of data that represents a very powerful inbound supply chain data warehouse after you've completed whatever activities are going on with your vendor compliance program or supply chain visibility or vendor performance program. In the process of doing that, you wind up with a very, very powerful supply chain data warehouse. That data is very valuable, and using it to improve inbound supply chain performance can affect downstream activities like inventory, out of stocks, excess inventory, distribution to stores, out of stocks in stores, and so on. And one other thing, Kate, is the ability to identify, in the case of a dashboard, the ability to identify a problem quickly can save a lot of money and hassle in the inbound supply chain.
Okay, great. Our second question here, how are dashboards helpful for analysis, troubleshooting, and process improvement?
Well, although a dashboard, as opposed to other things we're working on that are less about situational awareness and more about initial or preliminary analysis, even a dashboard should have everything in one place that allows someone to identify a problem, very quickly figure out, or at least get a general direction of where that problem is coming from, and then hand them off to a more detailed analysis tool. And a good performance monitoring tool is going to identify areas for improvement, which any organization should constantly be looking to correct.
All right, great. Well, thank you for your questions and for attending today's seminar. A link to the on-demand version of this program will be sent to you following the conclusion of this webinar. For those of you who have further questions about the material covered in today's presentation or whose questions were not addressed in the Q&A portion, feel free to contact Kevin Harris directly. Please also note that Kevin will be presenting at the RVCF Fall Conference, so be sure to attend, introduce yourself, and ask questions. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.